cats are really great at hiding signs of them being unwell, of them suffering from any kind of disease, and so it might only be noticed when they are actually struggling kind of quite severely, when they're almost on death's door when it comes to breathing heavily, and that is not an exaggeration. How often do you see your cat panting or breathing heavily? Chances are the answer is really not very often, if at all. So if you do see your cat breathing heavily, it's really important that you get them checked over, and today I'm discussing the reasons why this is. But before I get into all that, here's the intro.
Welcome to Call the Vet, the show that answers all your dog and cat questions so they can live healthier, happier lives. And here's your host, veterinarian Dr. Alex Avery.
Hi and welcome to episode number 39 of Call the Vet. If we've not met before, I'm Dr. Alex, and my aim on this podcast is to help you and your pet live a healthier, happier life by giving you the information that you need so that you can make the best choices for you and your pet and your family. So I'm really grateful that you're here sharing your valuable time with me. I know there's loads of other things you could be doing and other things you could be listening to, and I'm really happy that you've chosen to join me this week for a really important question, and it's a really important topic for any cat owner to be aware of, no matter what age your cat is and how apparently healthy they are. But before I get into today's question, if you do enjoy the show and you've not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button on your podcasting app so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. And if you've listened before and you enjoy what you hear, or you've just listening for the first time and you love this episode as well, of course, if you could head over to Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting app you're listening to and leave the show a 5-star review. It helps more than you can imagine with other people finding this podcast and knowing it's something that's worth their while listening to. But with that out the way, let's get into today's question. And Michelle asked the question today, and she simply wrote, "My small Maine Coon breathed heavily for 20 seconds. Is it serious?" So really, why is my cat breathing fast? Why is my cat breathing heavily? Is the underlying sentiment to today's question, and is it something to worry about? So heavy breathing is always going to be a bit of a worry in cats. And the reason for this is that cats are really great at hiding signs of them being unwell, of them suffering from any kind of disease. And so it might only be noticed when they are actually struggling kind of quite severely, when they're almost on death's door when it comes to breathing heavily. And that is not an exaggeration. Unfortunately, a lot of the time a cat is brought to me in the vet clinic because the owners notice that their breathing is a little bit heavier, it's a little bit laboured, maybe they're just having a little bit of a harder time breathing, or if they're panting, and that's even worse. Unfortunately, a lot of these times, the disease that's going on, the underlying problem, is really very far advanced. So, yeah, if your cat is breathing heavily at all, I would definitely be keeping a close eye on them, and I'd definitely be thinking about getting them checked out by your vet as soon as you potentially can, certainly giving them a call. Now, it's even going to be more of a concern if that breathing is not just heavy, but it's quite laboured. There seems to be more effort, and you can see that a lot of the time in cats if there is a lot of movement of their abdomen. So if their tummy is kind of going in and out, and that seems to be doing most of the work rather than the chest. So breathing heavily, there's a number of different things that can cause that, a number of different diseases that can cause your cat to breathe heavily or to breathe fast. And some of those are completely normal. So if your cat has just been exercising, if they've just been playing with their toy, if they've been chasing a laser that you've been pointing, kind of flashing around the room, then clearly they're going to be a little bit out of breath, especially if they're overweight or they're not used to getting regular exercise, and they're going to be breathing heavily. If they get very frightened as well, the normal response there of the body, the kind of the fight, flight or freeze response, is to start that breathing rate to increase. So that's normal. Pain is another cause of heavy breathing. That's something that clearly can be caused by lots of things. Maybe arthritis in an older cat would be pretty common there. Lung disease is next, so that would be things like asthma, potentially cancer as well on the lungs, affecting the lungs, growing within the lungs itself. And then one of the big causes that we see is actually fluid within the chest. So this is rather than fluid building up in the lungs themselves, it kind of fills up the chest cavity around the lungs. So the fluid that the lungs are normally kind of bathed in, if you like, that increases massively in volume, and that really restricts the ability of the lungs to expand. So we would call that a pleural effusion. And the big causes of that are heart failure, which is potentially relevant to Michelle's Maine Coon, as I'll come on to in a little minute. Also liver disease, trauma can cause that as well. And if that fluid is actually pus, then that's an infection within the chest, and that's something that we'll sometimes get with a cat bite to the chest, or maybe even a grass seed that's worked its way kind of down into the lungs. Maybe it's been breathed in and then kind of popped its way out of the lungs and into the chest cavity. Air in the chest is another potential cause of breathing heavily in cats or breathing quickly in cats, and that can be due to some kind of lung pathology, some trauma as well. And then there can be other masses within the chest, so there could be a cancer again. You could have something like a diaphragmatic hernia, and that's where the diaphragm, which separates the chest from the abdomen, develops a hole. That's generally because of a road traffic accident, being hit on the road by a car or another traumatic incident. That hole then allows the intestines to move from the abdomen into the chest. Now, that can be something that can be incredibly serious. And you would imagine that it would be serious all the time, but it's amazing. In some cases, cats can live with that condition for an awful long time, and it only becomes apparent that they've got this diaphragmatic hernia later on in life because they're being x-rayed for another reason. And then breathing heavily, another sort of thing could be something like anemia, so that actually a low number, a reduced amount of red blood cells within the blood. Now, the red blood cells are responsible for carrying the oxygen around the body, and if they can't do the job, then the body's natural response is to try and increase the rate of breathing so that they can kind of maximize that oxygen carrying capacity of the remaining red blood cells. So you can see there's lots of different causes of heavy breathing and fast breathing in a cat, and some of those are incredibly serious. Some, not too much to worry about if they've just had a fright, if they've just been running around. But a lot of them, there are things that you need to act on sooner rather than later. Again, if it's pain, well, that's not great, but that in itself isn't a fatal condition. But a lot of the other ones, if they're not treated aggressively and quickly, then the chances of a successful outcome are pretty poor. And unfortunately, in some of them, the chances of a successful outcome anyway are going to be pretty poor, if not hopeless. But the last thing you want to do is your cat to actually end up dying because they've suffocated, because either we've not really recognised that there's a problem, or we've not recognised the potential serious nature of the problem. And I'd argue that any cat who's been breathing heavily that can't be explained because of normal reasons should be checked out as a matter of urgency. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the middle of the night, depending on the history and the age and all that kind of thing of your cat, but it should be at the earliest opportunity, in my opinion. So why I say that heart disease is potentially a big issue for Michelle's Maine Coon is that about 30% of Maine Coon cats have an underlying genetic mutation that makes it much more likely that they will develop a form of heart failure called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So that's 1 in 3 Maine Coon cats is going to be really prone to getting that form of heart failure. So that's something to really keep in mind if you've got a Maine Coon cat. But equally, heart disease and undiagnosed heart disease is actually pretty common in the cat population as well. So if you've got a cat and you notice that they're breathing heavily, give your vet a call, have a chat, get them booked in to have a check over. If they're panting, so if they're open mouth breathing, they're sitting with their mouth open, then that's really serious because cats generally don't pant normally. It can be a sign of severe stress, and especially severe respiratory stress. You might also find that they're sitting hunched, their elbows are pointing out because that's trying to give their chest the maximum opportunity to expand and make use of what lung capacity they do have. But while you're waiting or while you're taking your cat into the veterinarian, then keep your cat as quiet as possible, handle them, move them, stress them out as little as possible, because these cats, they are really on the edge, and very small changes, very small increases in their stress level can result in them going into respiratory arrest, so stopping breathing altogether and passing away.
Get your questions answered at callthevet.org.
So that really answers today's question. You'll appreciate that all of the different causes of breathing heavily or breathing quickly in a cat are going to require different investigations, different management strategies, certainly in an emergency situation and in a long-term treatment situation. And then they're going to have different prognosis as well. If you want more information about some of those and more information about kind of what I've discussed in this podcast, make sure you head over to the show notes, because I'll include some links to related articles there, so you can find those at callthevet.org. And then finally, I just wanted to remind you about my calendar, my charity calendar for 2020. So I'm supporting a very worthwhile charity called the Tree of Life for Animals, which helps with stray dog control, with treatment of street dogs and cats and camels and all kinds of different creature over in Rajasthan in India. They do a fantastic job, and they also help with rabies control as well, which makes a huge impact to the human population over there. So if that sounds like a charity you'd be interested in supporting, and you're looking for a fantastic gift for Christmas or for yourself, then head over to ourpetshealth.com/calendar to check out my 2020 charity calendar. But anyway, that's it from me. Remember to subscribe if you're not already. And until next week, I'm Dr. Alex. This is Call the Vet. Take care.
You've been listening to Call the Vet. Be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of the show that answers all of your pet questions.